I wanted to start by asking you, when you came to the panel today, what was the one thing you wanted students to know about the importance of security?
Well, what I really aimed at was at conveying the message that there is an alternative way of conceptualizing peace and security. So I want them to, at least if there is one thing that I want them to take away from the first panel, is the idea of human security as an alternative way of conceptualizing peace and security.
Help the students to understand, what do you mean by human security?
Human security, as opposed to the traditional theories of international relations, for instance, neorealism or realism, focuses on the security of people rather than the security of the nation state as a political body, as a body politic. So one novelty about the human security paradigm is that it dissolves the false bifurcation between positive liberty and negative liberty. That human rights, it's only through human security paradigm that you will come to realize that human rights as a whole are indivisible and one.
Could you help the students to understand a bit more about the difference between negative liberty and positive liberty?
Negative liberty is negative liberty refers to those basket of liberties or freedoms that do not require the government or the state as a body politic not to do anything. That means to refrain from interfering with the basic civil liberties and entitlements. Whereas by positive liberty we mean those rights that require any government to do something in order to realize its obligations under international human rights instruments. And the prominent international human rights instrument that is a very good example of positive liberties is the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, while the prominent example of the negative liberties is contained in the International Covenant on the Civil and Political Rights.
How important are these international covenants, and how can the United States become more a part of that process?
There are different ways of incorporating, of being obliged to obligations under international human rights instruments, as if a state wants to be a member in good standing of the international community. So the United States, like any other state, is a member of the UN. So one of the ways in which the United States can incorporate international human rights into domestic laws and extend the required protections is by ratifying and signing international treaties, international human rights treaties, covenants. For instance, the United States has failed to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And by not ratifying the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the United States, very sadly, has joined the leagues of countries like Somalia.
Explain what you mean by these rights of the child, and why is the United States not joined?
It's not clear. It's not quite clear to me why the United States doesn't want to ratify, particularly this convention. But part of the reason would be not wanting to be obliged, not wanting to fulfill the obligations that arise from this treaty. Maybe one interest maybe has to do with adoption and those obligations that arise in connection with adoption, the best interest of the child. Let's say so. It's not clear to me why the United States doesn't want to. But President Obama has, on many occasions, made it clear that the United States has defaulted on its obligation to ratify this treaty.
How could the United States benefit from participating in that international conversation?
We need public debate. And one way of doing that is to try to bring the issue to the spotlight. So the media and human rights activists, those human rights watchdogs, like the Human Rights Watch, the CPJ, ITSI, all stakeholders need to bring the agenda to the public square and let an informed, rational discussion take place on it.
And the CPJ stands for?
For the Committee to Protect Journalists.
Okay. Yeah. What can students do to improve notions of human security?
What I actually recommend is to open up yourself to diverse points of view, to make critical reflections on what, for instance, as a citizen, you need to do so that America, as American citizens, what America needs to have in order to extend greater protection to civil liberties, and on how to best ensure the national security and the national interest of the United States. So this all you can do by opening up and pursuing free inquiry.
Talking about notions of opening up, let's talk a bit about faith. Let's talk about different notions of faith. What's the difference between doctrine and faith?
Well, I will take this as a question about the distinction between organized religion and some form of belief in some form of supernatural power. So, organized religion has its own rituals, its own sacred books, its own personnel, the priests, or whatever you call them. Whereas in faith, you don't have those processes and institutions that the organized form of religion needs. So all you need to do is just engage, just believe in something that you believe is right for you to believe in. So you might believe in Jesus Christ but you believe in God. So whether that God of yours is Jesus Christ or Muhammad or what have you. So that's what it is.
Does an emphasis on human security give people the opportunity and the right to explore and pursue their own faith?
Yes, because one of the emphases of human security is on human rights, and under human rights we have freedom of worship. So rather than focusing on, as we know, territorial integrity, it focuses on individuals' freedom, individuals' choice, personal choice. So human security requires that the state should refrain from interfering in one's freedom to worship.
What do we do when states and doctrine become one? When organized religion becomes the state, or when there is a state religion?
Well, that means you are having not a secular state, but a religious state. So you can have an Islamic state like Saudi Arabia, or a Jewish state like Israel, or a Hindu state like India. So these are religious states.
How do religious states interfere with human security?
Actually, this takes us to the issue of whether secularism is a core element of democracy. If you take a look at the history of the United States, secularism was even a latest phenomenon. Even in its original interpretation, the prohibition was on the federal government not to establish a union-wide religion whatsoever. So it took a longer time for the courts to interpret the protection, what secularism means, to take it from a prohibition on the federal government, but also on a prohibition on state governments. So the scope became broader in due course. So I think the defining feature of democracy is human rights, and human rights is the defining feature of human security. So whether a state is secular or religious, but as long as it respects people's human rights and gives primacy to individual choice, personal safety, I think you can still be a democratic state, and you can still be a member in good standing of the international community. I think right-wing conservatism is on the rise in Europe. For instance, if you take a look at the tragic event that took place in Oslo, Andreas Breivik, what he did was a conscious, deliberate, senseless act of terror, but he was deliberate. He knew full well what he was doing. Not only that, he was conscious of what he was doing, but also he was ideologically oriented, and that ideology belongs to the ultra-right wing, who bash on immigrants, or bash on Islam and other forms of religion other than your own. So that trend is kind of scary.
You've mentioned a growth in the rise of extreme right-wing positions and violence associated with that. Is that in reaction to a growing level of tolerance by other folks? Is that a reaction, or are they looking to chip away at that liberalism?
I really agree with what you are saying. I think it's a conscious reaction to the growing to people's being increasingly becoming more and more liberals. Liberalism is taking ground. Liberalism is gaining wide currency throughout the world. If you take a look at, for instance, what's going on in North Africa, what took place in North Africa in the wake of the Arab Spring. The Arab Street was changed totally, and it changed the whole political landscape in in the Maghreb region. So there is this another wave, maybe the fourth wave of democratization taking place in the world. So it looks like it is a conscious response to liberalism's gaining wide currency.
What about the young people in your own country? Are they becoming more tolerant? Are they more willing to accept? How are they dealing?
Ethiopia has changed, and Ethiopia changed for good since 1974, because 1974 marks the fall of the demise of the monarchy. So the monarchy, the ancient regime, with all its values and norms, institutions, what have you, it's gone. It was gone, and it was gone for good. So, though of course the government that replaced the monarchy was more brutal and more dictatorial than the monarch, but the whole idea, the whole value, the whole thing, principles of governance have changed. So Ethiopia moved from a very conservative monarchical society to a republican form of government, and with all its drawbacks that socialist, communist, republican government, that encourage young people to go out. There is this famous Ethiopian author, Sabat ገብረ who talks about Ethiopians get more emancipated, for instance, in sexual terms. You couldn't, during the monarchy, you couldn't take your girl, you cannot go out on the streets with your girlfriend, with your hands on your girlfriend. That changed after the fall of the monarchy. So values changed, but the regimes, even if the regimes changed, the regime that replaced the government was worse than what was before. And now we have, it's just like the same thing going on around. So the Ethiopians of this generation, the Ethiopians of my generation and the younger ones, they are even more liberal than the previous generations.